This final video for AEI instructors orientation test prep for the GMAT Integrated Reasoning section covers a section of the test that is unusual from the GRE and that we usually teach during the verbal class for GMAT. It is a sort of hybrid between verbal and quantitative sections. Some of the questions presented will involve textual information as well as numerical data. Many of these questions involve statistical analysis, so verbal teachers of the GMAT, you will want to review the statistics formulas and how they apply. Almost all of the integrated reasoning questions require critical thinking and logic skills. The answer choices are all multiple parts, and test preparation for this section should pay special attention to how those answering dynamics work. Be sure to present the necessary math formulas that students are likely to need for this section when you are teaching this to a verbal class. So the basics, first off, are that it is 30 minutes you get for this section, and there are 12 questions with multiple parts, which actually works out to be about 28 responses all told. They here get a separate score from their verbal, writing, and math scores, and it's on a 1 to 8 scale. It is not an adaptive section. It is instead linear and just goes straight from the easiest questions to the most difficult. Obviously, you have to do the easiest parts first, and if you are getting shorter and shorter on time at the end, guess and move on to the next one. Scoring is all or nothing. There is no partial credit on these multiple part questions. Usually there are 2 or 3 experimental questions that aren't counted towards your score, but you're not going to know which ones these are. There's no way to identify them, so just treat every problem like it counts. And on the GMAT, this is the only section where you are given a calculator. So look at the picture in the textbook. This may be from an old edition, this page number, but look at it in the textbook on the integrated reasoning section and review all of the buttons with the students so you can explain how they are used. Remember, dealing with international students, that many of them come from countries where they use the decimal, where we would use a comma, and a comma where we would use a decimal. So be very explicit. They have to learn the American system. The question types are table analysis, where the information is given to you in a table; graphics interpretation, which may involve charts like circle graphs or pictures, things like that; two-part analysis, which usually gives you 2 pieces of data that you have to compare and contrast with one another; and multi-source reasoning, which might be, for example, 3 emails, 2 of which are text and 1 of which is numerical data in a chart or a table. Usually the content on this section is business oriented, so it'll be relevant to the career of a student who's taking the GMAT exam. And these are focusing on your ability to solve complex problems using data from multiple sources in multiple formats. So they're just looking to see that the students have the ability to hold different pieces of information from different places in different shapes all at the same time. They need to use their critical reasoning skills and their quantitative skills on this part of the test. So table analysis usually looks like a spreadsheet. You can usually sort the columns, try to only sort them one at a time, and that spreadsheet will come with some text, headings, menus. All of this needs to be read. Take notes over general trends if you see any. And then the answer types you might see on this section can be multiple choice, and you'll select either A, B, C, or D, or E. You might also see dichotomous choice, which could be true or false, yes or no, or agree, disagree. Make sure the students learn the directions and tell them they might have to calculate things like percent change, median, or averages, other statistical information. Graphics interpretation is usually based on a chart, graph, scatter plot, something like that, with two statements that they have to complete, like some blank in the statement with a drop down box that they'll select an answer choice. Tell them they should not try to absorb everything. Just get the gist of the information and then read the text and paraphrase it to yourself. Look at the graph, the axis, XY axis names. What are the scales? Does one of them go up in units of 10 and the other one goes up in units of 100? Like, what are the units of measure being used also? Is it time and days and weeks, or is it hours and minutes? What are the units of measure? Tell them to look for basic, obvious patterns and then to read all of the answer choices. Make sure you show them the pictures and instructions, and they are usually about 3 to 5 answer choices available for each of the two statements. May or may not involve calculations in order to select the answers there. Third, two-part analysis. This is the third question type for integrated reasoning. This is most similar to the quantitative section. The basic strategy is back solving or plugging in the answers. You just try plugging in the answer choices, literally put them inside the formula. So you read the text, the instructions, and the choices. Get the gist of what the information is. Read, generate an equation that will help you find the answer, and then simplify. Double check your answers. First, check that you have calculated correctly. And secondly, check that you are answering the question that they are asking for. If you solve for X when they want Y, you're going to get the wrong answer. So make sure you check both that you have calculated correctly and that you have answered the correct question. There are 5 to 6 choices, usually 1 answer per column. You may actually find that it's the same answer for both columns. And the style of the question may be more of a like what strengthens or weakens the argument. So use those critical reasoning methods, and always be sure to read the instructions. That's probably one of the most important parts on integrated reasoning, is reading the instructions. For multi-source reasoning, the fourth and final integrated reasoning question type, you will have information in 2 to 3 tabs, and this can include text, charts, tables. It can include any kind of information. Usually it's multiple choice or dichotomous choice. Remember, yes, no, true, false, agree or disagree. And then again, the basic steps are to get the gist by reading, taking notes, and looking at all of the tabs. The answers here may require just some estimation, and as a good rule for the GRE, unless you have to make a very precise calculation, don't waste your time doing precise calculations on the GRE or the GMAT. It's usually not necessary, but see the instructions and look at the answer choices before you make that decision of whether or not to calculate precisely. And remember that multi-source reasoning will come in sets with many parts. It's the most complicated and most difficult, or it's considered to be. Some other hints and strategies for this, and then we'll talk a little bit about table analysis. Paraphrase the information. Teach students to put things in their own words, because once you've internalized it that way, it makes more sense and you can think more clearly about it. Show them what kinds of words would be important keywords, show them how to look for evidence, and that they should estimate as much as possible and calculate as little as possible whenever they can get away with it. Good general strategies are to always review the information before answering, looking at axes, measures, names, and scales. If there's a legend, to make sure and read it, column and row headings, all the tabs, look for connections between the different pieces of information. When there is text, read it and take notes. Look for connections, look for patterns, and make sure the information is supporting your inferences, because sometimes there is going to be insufficient information, in which case the answer will be something like no, false, or disagree. Likely is not the same thing as certain. Tell them to look for evidence. Don't just go with probabilistic answers. and make certain to read the instructions. I can't emphasize that enough. About table analysis, graphics interpretation, two-part analysis, and multi-source reasoning, a little bit more advanced detail if you want to have like a second day talking about this. There is the sort function for each of the columns. Tell them to use it only when they have to, because if they start messing around with it, any obvious patterns that were there with the presets might disappear. So tell them to look at the information before they try to sort it. And then it's always going to be one table where they have to evaluate 4 statements for that dichotomous reasoning, true or false, yes or no, agree or disagree. And of course, you want to first get the gist of that information. For graphics interpretation, the goal here is to try to make the statements true. And if you can use a piece of paper or a noteboard to check the measures against the placement, like actually I like to hold up a piece of paper to the computer screen and show them how it cuts off on the computer screen, use that as a tool, as a physical tool on the computer screen when they're taking this as a computerized test to see if you're making a good estimate or not. And tell them not to use the arrow keys to move around in this section because that can change your answers in the drop-down menus. Tell them to be very careful to just use their mouse, just to click with the mouse in the graphics interpretation. For two-part analysis, some advanced details for students are that they should set up their calculations very carefully. We have a principle in computer science known as GIGO. Garbage in equals garbage out. So if I set up the formula wrong, I'm going to get a bad answer, because if I put garbage into my labor, then I'm going to get garbage out as a result. So they have to set up their calculations very carefully, encourage them and show them what the easiest parts of this setup can be and tell them to do those parts first. Note that the answers will often be related or linked in some way, and that they need to use the back solving strategy. Write down the answer choices, make columns and leave a space between them. Pick the easiest of the variables to start with, label each column. One is easier, one is harder. Start in the middle with the easy column and work the steps through it. And for the second column, you may only have to look at the numbers above or below the choice in the first. And then check for a match between the two columns that'll prove the conditions true. Lastly, for multi-source reasoning, review all tabs, all of them. If there is not enough data for absolute certainty, choose no. And this is really important for the calculator to use the memory keys, because there are no parentheses that really work on the standard default GMAT calculator for the integrated reasoning section. All right, that's where I'm going to stop these videos. The rest of this website is dedicated to important forms, memos. You see the lab sign-up sheets, exam schedules, checklists, passcodes, professional development day, and the calendar. As always, please let me know if you have any questions at any time, and I will do my best to support you. Once again, welcome to AEI, and I hope you enjoy it here.